Listen closely, for this is no ordinary tale of quiet woods and peaceful routines. This is a journey woven from the whisper of forgotten legends and the unyielding spirit of a man who once walked through fire. For years, the veteran Jonas, a soul forged in the crucible of distant wars, found his only peace in the silent language of the Colorado Rockies. His companions in this self-imposed solitude were his two extraordinary dogs, Atlas, a loyal German shepherd with eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 missions, and Luna, a spirited husky whose piercing blue gaze always seemed to see beyond the visible world. They were his anchors, his compass in a world he had chosen to retreat from. But the mountains, in their infinite majesty, guard secrets far older and deeper than any man's sorrow. And on one crisp autumn morning, the familiar rhythm of their lives, the dawn coffee, the winding trails, the unspoken communion with the wild, was brutally shattered. It began subtly, with a shift in the air, a scent carried on a phantom breeze that stirred something primal within Atlas and Luna. Atlas, always the picture of discipline, suddenly ignored every command, his powerful body tensing with a strange, undeniable urgency. Luna, usually playful, became a focused shadow, her every movement purposeful. Their eyes, typically filled with devotion, now held a burning, almost desperate knowing. They pulled Jonas off the familiar path, their leads taut, their determination absolute. They were not merely tracking a deer or a bear. They were following a thread of fate, leading him to a place long forgotten by man, a dark maw carved into the earth, an old mine entrance nearly swallowed by creeping vines, and the relentless march of time. Deep within that cold, echoing darkness, where even the keenest human eye might see nothing, Atlas and Luna found it. Not a wild animal, not a forgotten treasure, but something no one could have expected, a small tarnished piece of metal. It was a child's silver bracelet, and engraved upon its delicate surface was a name that had been the town's silent, aching sorrow for the past 2 years, Robin. Today, dear listener, we invite you to step into the boots of this veteran. Let's explore together the thrilling mysteries that unfold as Jonas, Atlas, and Luna embark on a desperate quest that will force them to confront not just the chilling secrets of the mountains, but the lingering ghosts of his own past. Prepare yourself, for this is a story where every shadow holds a clue, every silence a hidden truth, and every step leads deeper into an adventure you won't soon forget. The silence of a Pine Ridge morning was a language Jonas understood better than words. It was a silence filled with meaning, woven from the whisper of wind through 100-foot pines, the distant chatter of a squirrel, and the soft thud of his own heart. He sat on the porch of his Spartan cabin, a fortress of solitude built against the world, and watched the sun's first rays spill like liquid gold over the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies. Jonas was a man carved from the same rugged landscape he called home. At 52, his tall frame was lean, but carried the dense, wiry strength of a life lived on the edge. His brown hair, cut short in a way that never truly left the military, was surrendering to distinguished silver at the temples. A thick but neatly trimmed beard and mustache couldn't soften the hard lines etched around his eyes and mouth lines that spoke of things seen and duties performed. Yet within the harsh geography of his face, his eyes held a deep, weary kindness. He wore his daily uniform, a worn flannel shirt of navy blue, gray, and muted beige, over a plain gray t-shirt, the fabric soft from countless washes. His jeans were faded to a pale blue, and on his feet were the same sturdy work boots he trusted to carry him through any terrain. Beside him, lying with a quiet dignity, were the two other souls who shared his world, Atlas and Luna. Atlas was a 9-year-old German shepherd, but to call him a pet would be an insult to their bond. He was a fellow veteran, his magnificent coat a thick tapestry of salt and pepper gray with flashes of white on his chest and paws, was the only soft thing about him. His muzzle was frosted with the white of age, but his amber eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. He was a retired military working dog, a canine specialist in tracking, separated from service by the same piece of shrapnel that had left a faint, silvery scar above his left hip. Luna, a lively 9-year-old husky, was curled up close to Atlas, her piercing blue eyes alert, and her thick white and gray fur a stark contrast to Atlas's more subdued colors. She was not a service dog, but a fiercely loyal companion who had adopted Jonas and Atlas the day Jonas settled in Pine Ridge, a bright spark of playful energy that complemented the more serious German Shepherd. They were two old soldiers and a free-spirited spirit decommissioned by a world that no longer had a mission for them, who had found their final watchpost here in the quiet embrace of the mountains. Jonas took a slow sip of his black coffee, the steam fogging in the crisp autumn air. The ritual was the same every morning. Coffee on the porch, a silent communion with the mountains, then the long walk. Today, however, was different. Today he would hunt. Not for sport, and not entirely for sustenance, but for the focus it demanded. The hunt was a mission, a clear objective that silenced the ghost that whispered in the quiet moments. An hour later, they moved through the forest, with the economy of motion that comes from years of practice. Jonas's steps were silent, his breathing controlled. Atlas moved ahead, a gray shadow gliding between the golden aspens and dark pines, his presence a silent assurance at Jonas's flank. Luna trotted alongside them, her tail often curled high, but her attention just as keen, sniffing the ground and air for any interesting scent. They were tracking a white-tailed doe, her tracks delicate and fresh in the damp earth. It was in a small clearing where the sun broke through the canopy, in brilliant shafts of light, that Jonas saw her. The doe stood alone, her head raised, testing the wind. She was beautiful, graceful, and utterly vulnerable. And in that moment, the Colorado wilderness dissolved. The scent of pine and damp earth replaced by the smell of dust and sun-baked mud. The year was 2009. The place a village outside Kandahar. The image hit him not as a memory, but as a physical blow. The sun was a hammer, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and fear. He wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding the hand of a small Afghan girl, no older than 8, her other hand clutching a bright red kite. She was alone, separated from her family in the chaos. He had promised to get her to the safe zone. Her name was Anela. He remembered the feel of her small, trusting hand in his. He remembered the brilliant, defiant red of her kite against the dusty brown landscape. He remembered the high-pitched whine that came a second before the world turned to fire and noise. He remembered seeing that red kite, torn and broken, lying in the street afterward. Jonas, the voice was his own, a ragged whisper torn from his throat. He blinked, and the Afghan sun retreated, replaced by the dappled light of the Colorado forest. The doe was gone. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of failure. He leaned against a pine tree, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the rifle in his hand, suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Atlas was instantly at his side, no longer a scout, but a sentry pressing his solid weight against Jonas's leg. The dog whined softly, a low thrum of concern, and nudged Jonas's hand with his wet nose. Luna, sensing the shift, nudged her head into his other hand, a quiet plea. It was the anchor Jonas needed. "I'm okay, boys, girl," he murmured, scratching Atlas's head and stroking Luna's fur. "I'm okay." But he wasn't. The ghosts were loud today. The hunt was over. The focus he'd sought had shattered. Now he needed a new mission, something to outrun the memories. His mind latched onto something he'd heard from Old Man Henderson at the general store weeks ago. Stories and local rumors about the old whispering mine, a long abandoned shaft deep in the less traveled part of the national forest. A place folks said was haunted, a place to be avoided. A perfect destination. "Come on, Atlas, Luna," Jonas said, his voice regaining its strength. "Let's go see about some ghosts." They changed direction, heading deeper into the woods toward the rugged hills where the old mines were carved into the mountainside. For the first mile, Atlas and Luna trotted at his side, content to follow. But as they neared the area Henderson had described, the dog's demeanor changed. It was a shift Jonas knew intimately. He'd seen it 100 times in the field. Atlas's ears swiveled forward, locking onto something unseen. His relaxed trot tightened into a stiff, purposeful walk. His tail, usually held in a gentle curve, lowered and became rigid. His nose, which had been casually sampling the forest's buffet of smells, now pointed to the ground, twitching, utterly fixated. Luna, equally alert, began sniffing the air more intensely, her blue eyes scanning ahead, a low growl starting in her throat. This was not the behavior of dogs who had caught the scent of a squirrel or a bear. This was Atlas and Luna, the operators, the canine specialists on a mission. Jonas stopped and knelt beside them. "What is it, boys, girl? What have you got?" Atlas and Luna ignored him, their entire beings consumed by the scent. They pulled forward, their powerful shoulders straining against the silence. Jonas followed, intrigued. He trusted their instincts more than he trusted his own. The dogs led him away from the barely there trail, pushing through thickets of thorny bushes and over moss-covered rocks. The air here was cooler, heavy with the smell of damp stone. As Jonas concentrated, he could smell it too. It was incredibly faint, almost lost beneath the scents of pine needles and decaying leaves. It was the smell of humanity, but stale and old, mingled with the metallic tang of the earth. It was a smell that did not belong here. Atlas's and Luna's excitement grew, turning into a low, controlled whine. They weren't just tracking now. They were closing in. They led Jonas to a sheer rock face, a wall of granite and overgrown ivy that looked impenetrable. A lesser eye would have seen nothing but a cliff, but Atlas and Luna didn't stop. Atlas pawed at a thick curtain of ancient ivy and tangled roots, whining with more urgency. Luna scratched at the ground beside him, her tail stiff. Jonas pushed the heavy vegetation aside. Behind it, like a secret waiting to be told, was a dark, narrow opening. A wooden frame, rotten and crumbling, was all that was left of what was once a mine entrance. The darkness within was absolute, seeming to swallow the autumn light. The air that seeped out was cold and carried that same faint, wrong scent. Atlas stood at the entrance, not barking, but emitting a low, steady growl from deep in his chest. His hackles were raised. Luna, with hackles equally raised, let out a sharp, short bark, then a deeper growl. They were on guard, alerting their handler that they had found something that had been hidden for a very, very long time. The soldier and Jonas took over before the man could hesitate. His first instinct was to establish security. He placed a firm hand on Atlas's neck and Luna's back, murmuring a low, steady command. "Easy, boys, girl. Stand down. Watch." Atlas's growl subsided into a low, watchful rumble, the sound vibrating through Jonas's hand. Luna's bark ceased, but her eyes remained fixed on the opening. The dogs obeyed, but their bodies remained a coiled spring of tension, their intelligent eyes fixed on the dark maw of the mine. Jonas trusted that tension. It meant the threat, or the memory of it, was real. Ignoring the entrance for a moment, Jonas's gaze swept the immediate area in a practiced, methodical arc. His mind, once clouded by the ghosts of Kandahar, was now sharp and clear, processing details with the cold efficiency of a threat assessment. The rumors old man Henderson had shared were just stories. This was tangible. His eyes caught on a patch of disturbed soil near a cluster of ferns. He knelt, his knees barely, making a sound on the damp ground. There, faint but undeniable, was the partial print of a small shoe, its edges softened by seasons of rain, but its shape still visible to a trained eye. It was old. He scanned further. A low-hanging branch on a chokecherry bush was broken. The wood inside faded to a pale gray, suggesting the break was old. But it was snapped downward cleanly, not twisted and frayed by wind or a heavy snow load. It was the mark of someone pushing their way through the foliage in a hurry, someone smaller than him. The pieces clicked into place with a grim certainty. This wasn't a haunted mine. It was a place someone had been. Someone had been brought here. With his flashlight in hand, a heavy-duty beam that could cut through the densest night, Jonas gave Atlas and Luna a quiet command. Forward. Atlas moved into the opening without hesitation, Luna right behind him, and Jonas right behind them. The sudden transition from the bright autumn day to the profound darkness was disorienting. The air changed instantly, becoming heavy, cold, and stripped of life. It tasted of damp stone, wet rot, and that faint underlying scent of old sorrows. The beam from his flashlight sliced through the blackness, revealing a narrow timber-supported tunnel that descended into the earth. The silence in here was different from the forest's peace. It was a dead, oppressive weight that seemed to absorb sound. Atlas and Luna didn't pause. They moved with purpose down the main shaft, ignoring a smaller collapsed tunnel to the left. Their claws clicked softly on the rocky floor. Jonas followed his boots, making a heavier, more deliberate sound. He swept his light from side to side, noting the damp, glistening walls and the debris of a century of neglect. About 50 yards in the tunnel, opened into a slightly larger chamber, where the original miners had followed a vein of ore. A pile of rotting timbers lay in one corner, and rusted tools were scattered on the ground, artifacts of a forgotten time. It was here that Atlas and Luna became agitated. Atlas veered into a recess in the rock wall, a small alcove, barely large enough for a person to lie down in. It was the most sheltered spot in the chamber, hidden from the direct line of sight of the entrance. He began to whine a high-pitched sound of distress and started digging frantically at the loose dirt and rock at the base of the wall. His paws moved in a blur, sending pebbles and soil flying. Luna joined him, digging with equal fervor, a soft, frantic growl rumbling in her chest. Atlas, Luna hold Jonas, commanded, his voice sharp but not angry. The dogs stopped panting heavily, looking back at Jonas with an expression of desperate urgency. Jonas knelt in the tight space, the beam of his flashlight focused on the spot the dogs had indicated. He saw nothing but disturbed earth, but Atlas and Luna had never been wrong. Jonas holstered his flashlight, took off his gloves, and began to dig with his bare hands. The ground was cold and damp. His fingers brushed against something hard and cool. It wasn't a rock. Carefully, he excavated the object. It was small, metallic, and caked with dirt. He wiped it clean against the rough fabric of his jeans. It was a child's bracelet, a delicate silver chain now tarnished with a dark patina. A small flat plate was attached to it. He angled it into the flashlight's beam. Engraved on the silver in a simple looped script was a single word: Robin. The name hung in the dead air of the mine, a silent scream. And as Jonas stared at it, the silver seemed to grow cold in his hand, a cold that seeped into his bones and straight into his memory. The mine, the darkness, the child's token, it was all a terrible echo. The image of the red kite faded, replaced by another from that same day in Kandahar. After the dust had settled, after the screaming had stopped, he had walked through the rubble, and in the debris he had found a small hand-carved wooden bird, its paint chipped, its wings broken. He had picked it up, knowing it must have belonged to Anella. It was so small, so innocent, a fragile piece of a life that had just been extinguished. He had held it in his palm, and its uselessness, its inability to turn back time, had crushed him. Now, holding this bracelet, he felt the exact same weight, the same cold finality, another token of a lost child, another life he had been too late to find. His breath caught in his throat, and for a second the darkness in the mine was nothing compared to the darkness flooding his own mind. But then something else rose through the grief, not despair, but a cold, hard resolve. The wooden bird had been an epilogue to a tragedy. This bracelet felt different. Atlas and Luna had found it. He had found it. It felt like a mission briefing, a call to action. He looked at the name again, Robin. He didn't know who she was, but he knew with every fiber of his being that her story would not end the same way as Anella's, not if he could help it. He stood up, his movement stiff. He placed the bracelet carefully in his pocket. "Good boys, girl, Atlas, Luna," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good find." He backed out of the mine, his mind already working, cataloging, planning. The haunted man who had entered the woods that morning was gone. The soldier had returned, not to fight an enemy abroad, but to wage war against a ghost at home. Once outside, he walked until his phone showed a single bar of service. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed the name he knew he could trust. It rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. "Tom Jenkins, Tom, it's Jonas Keene. There was a slight pause, then warmth entered the sheriff's voice. Jonas, good to hear from you. Everything all right up there on your mountain? Not exactly, Jonas said, his tone flat and professional, devoid of any small talk. I'm in the Old Forest sector, north of the Black Creek tributary. I found something at the Whispering Mine. The warmth in Sheriff Jenkins's voice vanished, replaced by the crisp authority of a lawman. What did you find? Signs of long-term habitation and a piece of personal property. A child's silver bracelet with the name Robin engraved on it. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with meaning. The name Robin was infamous in this county, a little girl who had vanished from a local park 2 years ago. The case had gone cold, leaving a permanent scar on the community. Are you certain? Jonas. Tom's voice was low. I am all right. Read me your coordinates exactly. Jonas did his voice steady. Okay, Tom said. I'm on my way. Do not go back in there. Do not touch anything else. Secure the area and wait for me. I'll be there as fast as I can. Understood, Jonas replied. And Jonas, yeah, thanks. The line went dead. Jonas slid the phone back into his pocket. He looked at the dark entrance to the mine, then at Atlas and Luna, who had taken up a seated position at his side, watching the trail, their ears pricked forward. They were on watch again, 2 old soldiers and a vigilant husky guarding a sacred, terrible place. A new mission had begun, and this time failure was not an option. The wait was a familiar state for Jonas. He had spent a significant portion of his life waiting for orders for an extraction, for the tension of a mission to finally break. He, Atlas, and Luna stood sentry at the edge of the trees, a silent 3-member unit watching the path. The sun had climbed higher, but a permanent chill seemed to emanate from the dark mouth of the mine. The first to arrive was Sheriff Tom Jenkins. His county SUV navigated the rough, unpaved track with a practiced ease. Tom was a man in his late 52s, broad-shouldered and solid, with a weathered face that spoke of a lifetime spent under the Colorado Sunday. His uniform was crisp, but his demeanor was that of a man who knew his people and his territory intimately. He got out of the vehicle, and his eyes immediately found Jonas. Jonas, he said, his voice low as he approached. He gave Atlas and Luna a respectful nod. You holding up? I'm fine, Tom, Jonas replied, his voice level. The scene is untouched, just as you said. Tom's gaze went to the hidden mine entrance, and a heavy sigh escaped him. Robin Miller. I was a deputy when that call came in 2 years ago. We searched these woods for months. He looked back at Jonas, his expression grim. Never thought we'd be back here for this. Before they could say more, the sound of other vehicles grew louder. The FBI had arrived. 2 black SUVs, clinical and imposing, pulled up behind the sheriff's truck. Doors opened, and a team of people emerged, moving with a quiet, focused energy that instantly transformed the clearing from a patch of wilderness into a federal crime scene. Leading them was Detective Sarah Reed. She was in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe practical ponytail. She was dressed for the field in dark cargo pants, boots, and a navy blue jacket with 3 bold yellow letters stitched on the back. Her face was sharp and intelligent, her movements precise. She carried an air of contained intensity, of a mind that was already several steps ahead of everyone else. She conferred briefly with Tom, her eyes scanning the area, cataloging every detail before she approached Jonas. Mr. Keene, she said, her voice clear and professional, without warmth, but also without condescension. I'm Detective Reed. Thank you for your call. We appreciate your diligence in preserving the scene. She looked him over, her sharp gaze, taking in his rugged appearance and the watchful dogs at his side. He was a piece of the puzzle, a key witness, but nothing more. Sheriff Jenkins has vouched for you, but I'll need you to walk me through your discovery step by step. Then my team will need the area clear. Jonas recounted the events of the morning, his report as concise and factual, as if he were debriefing a commanding officer. He spoke of Atlas's and Luna's behavior, the subtle signs at the entrance, and the discovery of the bracelet. He omitted the flashbacks, the raw emotion; those were not relevant to the mission. He handed her the small plastic bag into which he had placed the bracelet. Detective Reed listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Mr. Keene. Your cooperation is noted. We'll take it from here. With a nod, she turned away, and the full force of the investigation was unleashed. A mobile command unit was set up, yellow tape was unspooled, cordoning off the mine and a wide perimeter around it. A forensic team, clad in white Tyvek suits that made them look like astronauts on an alien world, began their meticulous work. Jonas, Atlas, and Luna retreated to the edge of the newly established perimeter, watching the controlled chaos. Jonas felt a familiar sense of detachment. He had done his part. The professionals were in charge now. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. They were searching for fingerprints, for fibers, for DNA, the tiny microscopic clues that would build a case. But Jonas's training wasn't about what a person left behind. It was about how a person survived. He watched a young forensic tech photograph the chamber where he had found the bracelet. The tech was thorough, his camera's flash illuminating the recess again and again. But his focus was on the ground, on the disturbed soil. Jonas's eyes were drawn higher up the rock wall. "Tom," he said quietly, as the sheriff came over to check on him. "What is it, Jonas? That recess? Tell them to look at the walls, not just the floor." Tom frowned. "What for?" "Just tell them," Jonas insisted. Tom trusted Jonas's instincts. He relayed the message to Detective Reed. She gave Jonas a brief questioning glance from across the clearing, but complied, speaking into her radio. A moment later, Jonas saw the tech in the white suit redirect his light onto the rock walls of the alcove. Jonas also pointed to a spot higher up in the main chamber. "And that fissure up there," he told Tom, "near the ceiling. It looks like a natural crack, but it's not. The edges are too clean on the inside. Someone's widened it from the inside, chipped away at it to improve the airflow. You don't do that for a short stay. You do that when you're planning to be somewhere for a long time." He then gestured back toward the recess. "And in the alcove, look for a pattern in the way the smaller rocks are placed near the base of the wall. It's not a random pile. It's a catchment. There's a slow water drip from the ceiling there. Someone arranged those stones to channel the water to create a small, clean pool to drink from." Detective Reed stared at him, her professional mask finally cracking with a flicker of something else. Surprise, maybe even respect. These were not the observations of a simple witness. This was the analysis of a survivor. She spoke into her radio again, her instructions now more specific. "I want forensics to examine the fissure near the ceiling for tool marks. And in the recess, check the rock pile for signs of deliberate placement. Take water samples from any pooled liquid and swab the surrounding rocks for DNA." She turned back to Jonas, her gaze now direct and searching. "You've spent time in places like this." It wasn't a question. "I have," Jonas said simply. They stood in silence for the next 20 minutes. Then the voice of the forensic team leader crackled over Reed's radio. "Detective, you were right. We have tool marks on the fissure. Looks like it was widened with a small rock hammer or a similar object. And the rocks in the alcove were definitely arranged deliberately. We found trace DNA consistent with saliva on the stones around the water pool. Someone was living in here for a long time." A heavy silence fell between them. The technical findings confirmed what Jonas's instincts had told him. This wasn't just a place where Robin Miller had been. It was a place where she had survived day after day, week after week. Detective Reed's entire demeanor toward Jonas had changed. The professional distance was gone, replaced by a focused collaboration. "What else do you see?" she asked, her voice low. The search had now become a reconstruction of a life lived in darkness. The evidence they found painted a heartbreaking picture. Scratches on the wall, hidden behind a loose rock, formed a crude calendar of more than 700 marks. A small pile of tattered blankets, faded wrappers from granola bars that had been discontinued over a year ago. Every discovery confirmed two terrible truths. Robin had been kept alive in this cold, dark hole for at least 2 years, and she was no longer here. The lack of any recent evidence, the age of the food wrappers, the undisturbed dust in most of the cave, it all pointed to the fact that she had been moved. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Detective Reed stood beside Jonas, looking at the yellow tape cordoning off the mine. The initial frantic energy of the investigation had settled into a grim, methodical process. 2 years, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her parents held a memorial service last spring. Most of the town believed she was gone. She looked at Jonas. Today, you gave them the first piece of real hope they've had since she disappeared. Jonas didn't feel like he had delivered hope. He felt like he had only confirmed the depth of a nightmare. He looked past the crime scene, past the flashing lights of the official vehicles, and into the vast, darkening wilderness that stretched out in every direction. The mine was just the beginning. Robin was out there somewhere in these mountains, and the ghost of 2 years felt like it was finally beginning to stir. The hours bled into one another. In the cold, sterile light of the FBI's forensic lamps, the mine had become a silent, hollow stage, where a 2-year-old tragedy was being painstakingly dissected. The forensic team worked with a quiet reverence, their white suits moving like ghosts through the chamber, but the mood was turning grim. They had collected fibers, taken soil samples, and documented every inch of the space, but the trail was old. The evidence confirmed a long-term presence, but offered little about where Robin might be now. Jonas stood near the entrance, just outside the yellow tape, with Atlas and Luna lying patiently at his feet. He watched the meticulous process his mind, a battlefield of hope and dread. He felt the familiar pull of helplessness, of being a spectator to a battle he desperately wanted to fight. His gaze kept returning to the small recess, where he had found the bracelet where the team had already taken samples and photographs. Something was nagging at him, a detail that didn't fit. Near the tattered pile of blankets, there was a single flat stone about the size of a dinner plate, leaning against the wall. It looked like part of the natural debris, but it was positioned at an odd angle. It wasn't lying flat like the other rocks that had flaked off the ceiling over the years. It was propped up. It was deliberate. He waited for Detective Reed to emerge from the mine for a brief consultation with her team leader. "Detective," he said, his voice low enough not to carry. She turned to him, her expression weary but still sharp. "Mr. Keene, the alcove," he said, nodding toward the mine. "There's a flat stone leaning against the back wall near the bedding area. It's not a natural fall. It's been placed there." Reed's eyes narrowed slightly. Her team was looking for microscopic evidence, not studying the cave's geology. But she had learned in the last few hours to respect the veteran's eye for things that were out of place. Without a word, she turned and spoke into her radio, relaying Jonas's observation. Jonas watched as one of the forensic techs, a young man with careful hands, approached the stone. He photographed it from several angles before gently moving it aside. Behind it, tucked into a small dark crevice in the rock, was a bundle wrapped in what looked like oilskin, or perhaps a thick plastic bag secured with twine. A hush fell over the clearing. The tech carefully placed the bundle into a sterile evidence container and brought it out of the mine. Inside the brightly lit mobile command unit, the air was thick with anticipation. Detective Reed, Jonas, and Sheriff Jenkins stood around a stainless steel table as the forensic team leader, a man named Davies with graying hair and practiced hands, began to work. He cut the twine and carefully unfolded the waterproof wrapping. Inside was a simple spiral notebook, the kind a child would use for school. Its cover depicted a cartoon unicorn prancing under a rainbow. The pages were warped and swollen from the persistent dampness, but it was largely intact. "It's a diary," Reed breathed. Davies opened it with the gentle precision of a surgeon. On the first page, in the large looping handwriting of a young child, were the words, "The Story of the Princess in the Dark Cave," by Robin Miller. What followed was not just a collection of evidence. It was, as the summary had foretold, a gateway into a child's soul. Detective Reed began to read some of the entries aloud, her professional voice softening with a raw, undisguised emotion. The early entries were filled with a stark, simple terror. Day 30. "I think the Shadow King told me today that nobody is looking for me anymore. He said my mom and dad have a new daughter now. I told him he was a liar. But when he's gone, the dark whispers that maybe he's right. The dark is hungry. It eats all the happy thoughts." Jonas felt a cold fist clench in his stomach. He saw Anella's face, her trusting eyes. This was the weapon of the captor. Not just chains, but the slow, methodical erosion of hope. But then the tone of the diary began to change. Interspersed between the entries of fear were new chapters in a different story. Day 120. Maybe the princess in the dark cave was not afraid today. She knows a secret. She knows the Queen of Light is coming for her. The queen is the most powerful in the land. She has hair like the sun and eyes like the sky, and she carries a sword made of moonbeams that can cut through any shadow. The Shadow King builds his walls of stone and lies, but he cannot stop the Queen of Light. She is on her way. Reed paused, looking up at Jonas. Her mother's name is Eleanor, she said softly. She has blonde hair and blue eyes. The diary was Robin's shield, her sword. Unable to fight back physically, she had waged a war in her imagination. She had transformed her mother into a mythical hero, her captor into a fairy tale villain, and herself into a princess whose rescue was not just a hope, but a certainty. This notebook was the testament of a spirit that refused to be extinguished. Jonas listened, his throat tight. He too had a Shadow King, a ghost of failure that lived in the dark corners of his mind. He had fought it with isolation, with routine, with the disciplined silence of the mountains. This child had fought it with a story, with the pure, unwavering power of a daughter's love for her mother. Her resilience was both a revelation and a reprimand. Davies carefully turned another fragile page. The fantasy continued growing. More detailed, more vibrant. A world of light, built in defiance of the all-consuming dark. Day 400. I guess today the Shadow King was angry. His voice was like rocks grinding together. But I didn't cry. I closed my eyes, and I saw the Queen of Light riding on her great white horse, Silverwind. They were crossing the Sea of Sorrows to get to me. The Queen told me to be brave. She said that even in the darkest cave, a single candle can light the way home. I am her candle. Finally, they reached the last entry. The handwriting was different. It was rushed, shaky, the pencil pressing hard into the page. The date at the top simply said, "The day the mountain cried." The thunder is a monster, and it's trying to break the mountain. The walls are crying. The Shadow King is scared. I can hear it in his voice. He keeps looking at the water coming in. It's a little river now on the floor. He said we have to go. He said the mountain is angry and we have to leave the gray castle forever. He is packing things in a hurry. He is yelling. I am scared, but I'm also not. Maybe this is it. Maybe the Queen of Light sent the storm to break down the walls. That was the end. The next page was blank. The flash floods, Sheriff Jenkins said, his voice heavy with realization. There was a brutal storm system that stalled over this range late that spring about 3 months ago. Caused mudslides all over the county. It would have flooded this mine in a matter of hours. The final piece fell into place. The storm had been their salvation and their curse. It had forced the kidnapper to move Robin, but in his haste, he had not known or not cared about the diary Robin had so carefully hidden. It was the one mistake he had made. Detective Reed closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing it all. When she opened them, her professional focus was back, but it was now fueled by a fierce personal fire. She looked at Jonas, no longer seeing just a witness, but a kindred spirit in this new mission. He was forced out, she said. He had to move her in a panic. That means he may have gotten careless. She looked at the diary now carefully sealed in an evidence bag. This child fought for her own sanity for 2 years in the dark. She left us a map of her soul. Jonas nodded, his gaze distant. He wasn't just looking for a missing girl named Robin anymore. He was looking for the princess in the dark cave. He was joining the Queen of Light. He was going to help her find her candle and bring her home. The Mobile Command Unit, a hub of cutting-edge technology and federal efficiency, had run into a wall made of crayon and a child's imagination. On a large digital display, a high-resolution scan of the last page of Robin's diary was projected. It was a drawing, a map born from the mind of a princess trapped in a dark tower. A crude, lopsided castle with a frowning face in the window was labeled Castle of the Gray-Bearded Giant. From it, a winding, jagged path, filled with scary-looking squiggles, was named the Trail of Fear. For 3 hours, Detective Reed and her team of analysts had tried to force logic upon it. They had overlaid it on topographical surveys, run software to identify geological formations that might resemble a castle, and cross-referenced the drawing with every known structure in a 50-mile radius. The result was always the same: nothing. "It's a fantasy," one of the analysts, a young man named Carter, said, rubbing his tired eyes. "The geographic markers are inconsistent. The scale is impossible. It's a drawing of how she felt, not what she saw." Detective Reed stared at the screen, her arms crossed, her jaw tight with frustration. He was right. Her entire career was built on evidence, on data, on the cold, hard lines of fact. This map had none. It was a dead end, a final heartbreaking cry from a little girl that they were powerless to interpret. Jonas had been sitting quietly in a corner of the unit, Atlas's head resting on his boot and Luna curled up at his side. He had listened to the technical jargon, the failed attempts to impose order on a child's narrative of survival. He understood their frustration, but he knew they were asking the wrong questions. They were trying to read a map of the world. He knew this was a map of a soul. "Detective," he said, his voice calm in the tense room, "can I see it again? The original?" Reed looked at him, a flicker of desperation in her eyes. She nodded to Davies, the forensic lead, who carefully brought the notebook now.